In preparation for the new Obi-Wan Kenobi show to be released tomorrow, I felt that it was finally time to look over the most political of all three of the Star Wars eras. If you actually believe that, I don't understand what world you live on. I mean, the beginning of episode 1 very clearly lays out that it's going to be a political story. Literally, the entire reason that the Skywalker saga even begins is because the taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. That, plus a bunch of the scenes that take place in the Senate, were basically one of the main critiques of the prequel trilogy. Though to be fair, it seems that has kinda gone out the window, because a lot of the people who grew up with the prequels with more positive feelings are now old enough to start making their own videos giving praises to the prequels. And the old fat story nerds that would usually be all capsing the people in the comment section kind of focused in a different direction, but that's a different video in and of itself. We're here to focus on the prequels, so let's just get right into it. First, they have to set up the original trilogy, so of course they have to borrow elements from the original trilogy's politics, having a major plot element of the prequels being Palpatine's Hitleristic rise to power. And the Hitleristic rise to power was not really lost on elementary school me. An army that would eventually become the Stormtroopers commit a genocide against a religious group that starts with the letter J. I mean, come on, that's pretty on the nose. Going so far as to not only make the Great Jedi Purge at the Jedi Temple specifically be based on the Night of Long Knives, but also changing Palpatine's title. You see, prior to the prequels, Palpatine's title before Emperor was originally President, but they changed it to Chancellor, again to hammer it into the elementary school, middle school kids that wouldn't understand it unless it was point blank stated. If you remember my last video, you'll also understand that there was a bit of a pretext for the Vietnam War. You know, this small group of rebels combating against this really powerful empire and managing to win, using the politics of the era to basically set a fantastical story. And George kind of did it again in this trilogy, although instead of it being afterwards, he did it sort of in the pretext of it. For starters, episode 1 was made and produced in the late 90s, so he basically gave a little bit of a tepid critique of the Clinton administration with the person that Palpatine would end up replacing, Chancellor Valorum. You see, George describes Valorum as a guy who walked in with all these great big ideas, but then when he got in, corruption and bureaucracy basically tied his hands so he couldn't do anything to actually do that. And due to this, a new face would enter the scene, basically riding this wave of discontent into a position of power. I wonder what was happening around the time of the late 90s, early 2000s that would give George that idea. And of course, as the millennia shifted, so too did the administration that George talked about, with the latter two prequels having a bit of subtext talking about the Bush administration. And I think it influenced the rest of the prequels a little bit more than you might even realize. First, let's go with a little bit of a funny tidbit. Remember in the last video where I talked about how Palpatine was basically an amalgamation of a ton of people? Well, apparently for the prequel era, George actually added another face into the mix. Dick Cheney. I mean, I'd have to say it kind of fits. But back to the trilogy as a whole, I'm actually going to make a very bold statement. I'm going to say that perhaps George Lucas might have shifted how the entire rest of the trilogy played out, specifically due to certain events that happened in real life. Let me give an extremely brief summary of the plot of episode 2. An act of terrorism happens. The government is given extreme amounts of power, then a long-standing military conflict begins in the desert. Am I reading the plot of Star Wars or am I looking at a history book? Was this what George intended all the way back in the 70s? Probably not, but hey, it's what he actually ended up doing. Now, another piece of politics in the prequels that ties into this, but probably got glossed over by a lot of us because of how it was handled, was the Separatist Alliance. For those who don't know, the Separatists are basically the non-Sith bad guys. They are the people who are aligned with Dooku, who are separating from the Galactic Republic and forming their own government. Oh, so these guys must be like governors and senators from planets in the Republic that are disillusioned with them, right? No. They are the Trade Federation, the people who are in charge of galactic trade, the Techno Union, a group of businesses that, rely heavily on technology, the Commerce Guild, a collective of many corporations, the banking clan, the people who are in charge of banking. You see, these aren't people who are pushing for the war for some ideological reasons. but rather these are the corporations that benefit the most from this war. See, it seems that George Lucas is trying to add a little bit of subtext about the military-industrial complex and people who financially benefit from the wars that they push. And these people are planning on playing both sides of the war in order to make the most financial gain. However, there's one problem. The films don't explain that at all. These people are essentially only shown to be on the separatist side, so they say, oh, they're clearly bankrolling the separatists, right? But they're also technically bankrolling the Republic. The Trade Federation literally has a seat in the Senate, and he gets to keep that seat during the Clone Wars, when the Trade Federation is openly bankrolling the separatists. If they're supposed to be the bad guys, then how come he gets to stay on the good guy chamber? See, one of the major problems with the prequels in general is that they basically just want to skip all the way ahead to the point where Vader turns, so they don't necessarily go in depth on things that probably should have been expanded upon. For example, we know that Palpatine has gotten emergency powers. What do those emergency powers entail? We know that entails making a galactic army, but does that entail anything else? In episode 3, they go on to explain how Palpatine's been in office for 13 years, longer than any chancellor has been in office. Are there not term limits? Has there even been an election? Is that part of his emergency powers, that he gets to stay in office forever? They explain, oh, he's taken over the courts. Wait, what? When did this happen? Is that part of his emergency powers too? How is he getting the entire Senate chamber to basically just go along with what he's saying? Wait, scratch that. There are some senators who oppose him. You know, Padme, Bail Organa, and Mon Mothma. But are they doing anything? Or are they just opposing him privately, but signing on to every bill he's doing? And again, what bills is he passing? You see, I think that's kind of the issue with the prequels in general. You see, one takes place 10 years before the other two, so it's so removed from what's going on in these two movies. And that leaves a good chunk of the important part that this era needs to talk about just unanswered and just vaguely implied in the last one. Especially considering at the time of its release, it's literally like, oh, we just got the Clone Wars started. Okay, now it's over. Man, if only there was a piece of Star Wars media that was able to actually expand upon the war, and actually expand upon all the things that I mentioned before, plus just the general idea of the war being a long-standing conflict. As most people who watch this say, it's the thing that saves the prequels. Star Wars The Clone Wars is able to explore all these themes plus more in a format that is very easy for all the people who grew up in this time period to understand. And believe it or not by dumbing it down. It's able to actually go through all this stuff in a very concise manner. You know, when the guns and the lightsabers aren't on screen, it actually gives you time to think. And it basically takes the black and white stuff of the movies, and it actually shows it's a lot more gray. Take the Separatist Alliance. Sure, we still have all these people that are directly profiting from the war and stuff, but also we get an introduction to the Separatist Senate, the senators that directly left the Republic, and we learn their actual reasons for leaving the Republic, and it's a lot more sympathetic than you'd think. You see, they view the Republic as corrupt and bad, but also it directly serves the interests of the core worlds while hurting the outer worlds. For those who go outside, the core worlds in Star Wars are where the humans live, and as you expand further and further out, you get less humanoid and more alien-like. So basically, they're arguing that the Republic is systemically racist against aliens, and that's also shown with the layers on Coruscant. You see, let's think about it. Where do we go on Coruscant? We go to the nice places, the places that are government buildings, essentially. And if not that, we go to a nice, rich house. But in the Clone Wars, they not only go to the other side of the planet, but they also go into the planet. And we see the further down you go, the less prosperous it looks. And coincidentally, not a lot of humans down there. I see that's a good enough transition to talk about the flaws of the Republic. You see, because they actually do show the flaws of the Republic. As I mentioned before, it seems that society is structured to hurt people who are not human, but also they're just generally more corrupt and are not immune to the things that we thought would only be attributed to the bad guys. While the Separatist Alliance has a bunch of people who are bankrolling the war and are only in it for their bottom buck, so too does the Republic. There is one member of the Senate who only got her seat because their species is the one who is creating the clone army. And as such, she spends her entire time in the Senate saying that the Republic needs to expand its military, they need to equip better equipment, you need to order more clones, basically anything that will make her pockets be filled with more cash. And don't think this is just the Republic, the Jedi are also guilty of a lot of bad things. So much so that there's an entire genre of YouTube basically going over all of the war crimes committed by the Jedi. The Jedi are forced to break their code of ethics and work with literal criminals. The ending of a story arc literally has the Jedi go, this thing is going to make us look bad, so we're going to cover it up. The quote-unquote uncorruptible Jedi Order became corrupt in and of itself. The show even starts to address the ideas of non-interventionism or pacifism. Remember when I say, is Padme actually doing anything? Well, yeah, she is. She's basically the Star Wars version of Russ Feingold, being one of the loudest anti-war voices in the Senate. And she explains some of the things that Palpatine's doing. Due to the expanded war effort, social programs have suffered extensively, so Padme wants to then end the war and put the money back into social programs. Remember when I mentioned the Separatist Senate? Well, since it's now more ideological, there are certain peace senators in there too. In fact, we're even introduced to a group of star systems that don't want to get involved in the conflict either way, the biggest one being Mandalore, who essentially becomes a little bit of a proxy war between the Separatists and the Republic. And they also address moral dilemmas of how far you're willing to go. There's one story arc where someone literally commits terrorism in order to get their anti-war message across. The clones are even given their own perspective in the war, having mixed feelings because, yeah, they might not like the war, but without it, they wouldn't exist. And the thing that makes it more mature than the movies is that they don't give an answer. The only people that are objectively in the bad are the Sith and maybe the war profiteers, but everyone else is given pretty valid reasons to both oppose or support the war, and it's up to your interpretation on who you agree with. So anyways, I think I've rambled enough. So go watch these things if you haven't already, or if you have, watch them again. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.